Margaret Sullivan, an 80-year-old widow, entered Judge Judy's courtroom leaning on a worn wooden cane, dressed in a neatly pressed floral dress and clutching an old leather handbag close to her chest. Her fragile hands shook visibly, and her swollen, tear-stained eyes told of sleepless nights and unbearable grief. At first glance, her appearance suggested a routine small claims dispute, an elderly tenant accused of owing $2,541 in unpaid rent. But what unfolded in that courtroom was anything but routine. Within minutes, Margaret would reveal a truth so devastating that Judge Judy, known for nearly 3 decades of unwavering composure and sharp authority, would do something no one had ever seen before. She would leave her bench in silence, overcome not by legal arguments, but by the crushing weight of a tragedy that exposed the impossible choices faced by countless elderly Americans. The plaintiff, 62-year-old David Morrison, was not merely a landlord demanding overdue rent. He was the owner of a modest 12-unit apartment building in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and more importantly, he had been Robert Sullivan's closest friend for over half a century. David and Robert had fought side by side in Vietnam in 1968. They had survived horrors together, returned home together, and remained brothers in every sense except blood. For 43 years, Margaret and her husband Robert had rented their small apartment from David, faithfully paying every month without fail, until 3 months ago, suddenly, the rent stopped coming. Margaret stopped answering David's calls. She refused to open the door when he knocked. Confused, hurt, and burdened by his own financial pressures, David had no choice but to file suit. What David did not know, and what no one in that courtroom yet understood, was why Margaret had stopped paying. Margaret and Robert Sullivan's love story began in 1964 at a church social in Brooklyn. Margaret was a young schoolteacher with dreams of a simple life. Robert worked for the Postal Service, building a future through steady, honest work. They married in 1965 and spent the next 58 years devoted to one another. Their life was humble but full of purpose. Margaret spent 35 years teaching second grade. Robert delivered mail for 4 decades, regardless of weather or hardship. They lived carefully, avoided unnecessary luxuries, and saved diligently. By retirement, they had accumulated $127,000, not wealth by society's standards, but enough to provide security in old age. Then, 18 months before Margaret's courtroom appearance, their world shattered. Robert was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Doctors estimated he had 6 months to live. There was, however, an experimental treatment that might extend his life. It was not covered by Medicare or insurance, and it came with an enormous cost. $8,400 every month. Margaret faced an agonizing decision. Should she preserve their life savings and financial security, or spend everything for the chance of more time with the man she had loved for nearly 6 decades? For Margaret, there was never truly a choice. She chose Robert month after month. She drained their savings to pay for treatment. She watched the retirement fund they had built over 58 years vanish. But with every payment came precious extra time, more mornings waking beside him, more afternoons holding his hand, more evenings sharing memories. After 8 months, their savings were gone. Still, Robert lived desperate. Margaret turned to credit cards, maxing out 5 of them and accumulating $31,000 in debt to continue his treatment. Then came the moment that would haunt her forever. 3 months before Robert's death, Margaret had exactly $847 left in her bank account, the exact amount of 1 month's rent. That same month, Robert's treatment payment was also due. She could not afford both. Sitting at the kitchen table where they had shared thousands of meals over 4 decades, Margaret made the most painful decision of her life. She paid for Robert's treatment. She chose 7 more days with her husband over a roof above her head. And she made that same choice the following month. And again the month after that. Robert died 8 weeks before the courtroom hearing, in the bed they had shared for 58 years, with Margaret holding his hand. The treatment had given him 7 extra months, 7 months purchased at the cost of every penny they had saved. Crushing debt, and the loss of Margaret's financial future. When Judge Judy asked Margaret why she had failed to pay rent, the elderly widow finally spoke. Through tears, she recounted every sacrifice. She explained how she had spent their savings, destroyed her credit, and ultimately chosen her husband's life over housing. I chose holding Robert's hand for 7 more days over having a roof over my head, she said softly. The courtroom fell silent. Margaret admitted she owed the money. She did not deny responsibility. She simply explained that she could not let Robert die sooner if there was anything left to give. She had chosen love. For perhaps the first time in her television career, Judge Judy was left speechless. The famously stern judge removed her glasses, visibly emotional. Then, in an unprecedented moment, she stood up from her bench and approached Margaret directly. Looking into the widow's tear-filled eyes, Judge Judy spoke not as a television judge, but as a human being. She told Margaret that what had happened was not personal failure. It was systemic failure. She condemned a healthcare system that forces elderly citizens to sacrifice homes, savings, and dignity simply to buy time with loved ones. Turning to David Morrison, Judge Judy asked what he would have done if Robert himself had come asking for mercy. David broke down. He admitted he would have forgiven the debt immediately. Overcome with guilt and heartbreak, he tore up the lawsuit on the spot, dismissing the case entirely. But Judge Judy did not stop there. Recognizing that forgiveness alone would not erase Margaret's debt or secure her future, she took extraordinary action. She arranged immediate intervention through advocacy organizations. Then she announced that her show would personally pay off Margaret's entire $31,000 medical debt. Every dollar. Additionally, 6 months of rent would be covered to ensure Margaret could remain in her home while rebuilding her life. Margaret collapsed into tears. David embraced her, apologizing for not understanding her suffering sooner. For the first time since Robert's death, Margaret was no longer facing the future entirely alone. 6 months later, Margaret remained in her apartment, surrounded by the memories she and Robert had built over a lifetime. Her debt was gone. She had begun grief counseling. Her relationship with her distant son slowly improved, inspired by Margaret's ordeal. David Morrison established a memorial fund in Robert's name to assist elderly tenants facing medical emergencies. Margaret, despite her pain, began volunteering in hospice care, offering comfort to dying patients and their families. Her story spread across millions of households, igniting conversations about healthcare injustice, senior poverty, and the unbearable sacrifices so many are forced to make. Margaret Sullivan chose love over financial security. David Morrison chose compassion over legal entitlement. Judge Judy chose humanity over procedure. And together, they revealed a painful truth. No one should ever have to choose between saving the person they love and keeping a place to call home.